Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. Chris Brown once asked the question, how are you going to hate from outside of the club when you can't even get in? Now, the question with the National Dialogue is actually, who wants to get in? Who wants to get in? Because it looks more and more like people are not trying to get in. People are distancing themselves. They are pushing back. They are questioning. It turns out that the National Dialogue isn't the hottest thing on the block. It's turning into that kind of a club where there are more promoters than revelers, more gents than ladies. Nobody's trying to get in. And the latest development is that Kgalema Motlanthe has said, the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation is now ditching the dialogue. The Mbeki Foundation has already ditched the dialogue and dissed the dialogue. They ditched, they dissed, they dismissed, they questioned, they queried. Hey, this dialogue, it's in shambles. It's truly in shambles. And the public has already said andizi to this whole thing. Even with all of the influencers, the promoters, the ministers who were in attendance, it barely trended on social media, barely went viral, except for the clips which were showing the shambles in HD, in 4K, in 1080p. This is really something which is turning into its own, litmus test, or rather its own thermometer on how the public is feeling about the Ramaphosa administration and its performance in this particular moment, right? Just think about this. Kgalema Motlanthe is out. Thabo Mbeki is out. All the other foundations, Oliver Tambo and Sisulu, all out. Biko, whatever, they're all out. We already know the Jacob Zuma Foundation was never part of the dialogue. And the party led by Jacob Zuma, the MK party, also not part of the dialogue. So of the 4 living presidents of South Africa, Mr. Ramaphosa is alone in this initiative and alone in this moment. His colleagues who have led the country at his level through their entities have basically dismissed this particular moment, initiative. It's not a good start to the dialogue. It's not a good start to a dialogue. There was drama on the stage on the first day. At this particular point, it may be worthwhile to just let the idea rest. There was an effort put in, but doubling down may lead to further embarrassment. They're going to continue, though, because there's something that I'm going to explain why they're going to continue later on in the video. I mean, Tupac Shakur already told us that South Africa is a movie, a drama, a series. In the song, Mzansi Don't Cry. And to be honest, he should have added to that, it's a telenovela, because the pace at which, the clip at which we keep seeing new developments, new stories is crazy. And it just shows that so much is happening at any given moment. So Kgalema Motlanthe actually has made a serious contribution, which I think is worth considering. So what he has said in talking to the media and explaining why his foundation has pulled out, and one of the interesting things that he said is that given South Africa's problems, you do not need a dialogue. You actually need a referendum on issues. Referendum. Now, I think that's an important point, because one of the big questions is that after all the money has been spent, after all the cheese and the sandwiches have been digested, after the chatting and the chatter, what will be done? What tangible outcome will emanate from these particular discussions and debate? So if actually there was some form of referendum, then this particular moment would matter a little bit more. It would have a bite, more of a bite than what is currently happening. Now, referendums can be very tricky for politicians, because you can call a referendum but then it goes left for you and the things that you're interested in. I mean, if you think about the United Kingdom, right? In the UK, Ed Cameron was pressured into calling a referendum by the more conservative side of his party, the ones who were on the far right of the Tory party. They pressured him into a referendum on the UK leaving the EU. That culminated in the Brexit vote. He himself was not a fan of the departure from, the EU. When the Brexit vote was successful for the Leave side, it was the end of his career. It was a major damaging blow to the UK economy. Right now, the UK economy is struggling, and some would say it has stagnated And it also led eventually to the demise of his own party. Because after that, we went Theresa May, went Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, and now we have I'm not a Nigerian British lady, Kemi Badenoch, leading the Tory party, and she is a disaster. Oga, you are Nigerian in any case. You can't do what you're trying to do. She's trying to dismiss that she's Nigerian so that the people who are, the ultra conservatives of the Tory party can accept it, but they will never accept it. They'll keep telling her to go back to Africa. Right now, Nigel Farage almost has a clear path to becoming the next prime minister of the United Kingdom because, the Reform Party is picking up momentum. The left is fragmenting. Labour turned into some version of the Conservative Party. They're not able to distinguish themselves. They're going to get a challenge from these new left formations. And all of that is just going to open the way for Nigel Farage. But it'll also maybe lead to an interesting coalition there in the UK based on how the things will play out in their next election. Now, back to South Africa. Referendums, as I've pointed out, can be tricky. Now, who can call a referendum in South Africa? Only the president may call a national referendum, acting on the advice of the cabinet and in terms of an act of parliament. So the Constitution of South Africa does not expressly create a general right to national referendums. However, when discussing the powers of the president, Section 84.2G gives the president the power to call a national referendum in terms of an act of parliament. So he could call a referendum on a variety of issues because people have been calling for many things to be changed. For instance, the mandate of the Reserve Bank to be changed, right? There are debates around that. There are debates around who should be protected under the Bill of Rights. Should it be citizens? Should it be residents? Should it be everyone living in South Africa? There are calls for the death sentence to be, reimposed on violent offenders, violent criminals. That likely will be deemed unconstitutional by a constitutional court on the basis of what their reasoning was in S versus Makwanyane. But point I'm making is that people are calling for various things which do require some level of referendum in order to be able to be implemented. And also, if you were to ask, some people would say we need to have a referendum on our relationships with America, relationships with China, relationships with Iran. What should the foreign policy position be of South Africa? Even that in and of itself is something that some people may think is referendum worthy. So because people are calling for many different things to be changed, the idea of a referendum has merit. That idea in and of itself, I think, would lend to credibility, energy, and, salience to this particular process in a way that right now the process doesn't have that credibility. I mean, did you hear the president asking questions which he should know the answer to as the head of state, as the person who was the co-convener of the, what is it called again? The National Development Plan? He should know these, but this is what he had to say. This is what he was asking.
We also need to ask ourselves, why do so many people live in abject poverty and so few live lives of opulence? Why, after decades of democracy, are the prospects of a white child so much better than those of a black child? We need to ask ourselves that. We also need to ask ourselves, why do women get paid less than men for the same work? That's what we need to ask ourselves. Now, we also must go deeper and ask ourselves, why, when we have a Bill of Rights in our Constitution, are the LGBTQI plus people still discriminated against? Why are they still stigmatized and harassed? Why do clinics run out of medicine? Are questions that we must ask ourselves. And why do taps run dry? These are some of the questions that we must be willing to ask and which we must be prepared to find answers for. But more than that, my fellow South Africans, these are the challenges that we must be ready to do something about as individuals, as organizations, as communities, as parents, as elected representatives, and as public officials?
The answer to the question is actually very clear. It's mismanagement, it's miseducation, it's maladministration, it's mismaintenance, it's miscoordination. All of those things are contributors to the problem. But at a deeper level, you have to make the diagnosis that it's because it's an extractive political and market economy. That diagnosis that it's an extractive economy and not an inclusive economy is important to solving the problem. But these are things that should be known to the head of state who has all of the resources, consultants, advisors, ministers, research departments. All of these people could have told him that. And somebody who has been a senior leader in various areas, in the mining community under NUM, within the negotiation processes, within business, you should have a clue. You should know. So these questions are, or that type of speech is what really hurts the credibility of the process, because people are like, you should know these things. You should know the answers to these questions. But I'm going to try to explain to you why, or my theory as to why this is going to continue and why this will still matter to the ANC, to President Ramaphosa, and why they're going to push through with it as things stand. So I'm going to start off by giving you a little bit of interesting history that you may not be aware of, but I think it's quite cool to know. In 1923, Edward Bernays wrote a book called Crystallizing Public Opinion. In the book, he discusses techniques for influencing opinion. Bernays emphasizes using established communication channels like newspapers, radios, lectures, and creating, listen to this, creating newsworthy events to capture public opinion. He advocates appealing to human basic instincts such as fear, curiosity, aggression, and navigating the shifting dynamics of overlapping social groups. This is all part of what is known as manufacturing consent. And there's another book which we're going to do a deep dive on in the book club, and the book club is known as the Book Lab. You can join it. It's by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky, and it talks about the political economy of the mass media. Now, the term manufacturing consent itself comes from a 1922 book on it's called Public Opinion by Lippmann. Now, that book, Public Opinion by Lippmann, is the one that conceptualizes this term manufacturing consent. So this manufacturing of consent is the purpose, the agenda, the desire of the national dialogue, right? Here's what you need to be aware of and what the ANC is aware of, right? So number one, the ANC understands that it's losing popularity. They know this from the election results, local government, national elections. They know this from the polling. The ANC also understands that they really can't do anything significant to fix the most pressing public-facing challenges, right? When the public goes to police stations, to clinics, when they go to public schools, when they go out onto their roads, they see the failures of the state. And the ANC understands short to medium term, there's very little that they can do. Short term, when you're thinking about strategy, that's up to 1 year, medium term, 3 to 5 years, long term, 5 years to 100 years, whatever, right? So the ANC understands in the short term, what are they going to do to stop hoshkari behavior? You thought I wasn't going to say it. I said it. What are they going to do to stop hoshkari behavior? The hoshkari mamas, the hoshkari fathers, they're all operating, moving, shaking, doing what they can. And I've got an interesting episode which is coming up, which is about this Katiso Molefe and some of the shenanigans that he's been up to. But look out for that one for tomorrow. So they know that they can't do much. So they have to be seen to be doing something and if you get the public talking and feeling like there's something happening, a talk or a discourse or a dialogue can be one of the ways which you can try to do that. So the ANC also understands, and this is why they're trying to do and push for this national dialogue, eminent persons and all of that. Remember, you are eminent dissectors. You're watching this episode, you the eminent one. If they didn't mention you in the eminent list, don't worry about it. I am calling you eminent. My eminent dissection community. You know what's up. So the ANC also understands a major point and a major development in the world. They understand that they are not in charge of conversation anymore, right? So discourse is now happening on social media, on TikTok, on X, on Instagram, and WhatsApp groups. It's happening on new media like podcasts, YouTube, you name it. It's happening there. They don't control those platforms. And it becomes so frustrating to them. That's why you keep hearing ministers and committee chairpersons looking at podcasts like, how dare these podcasts exist? How dare these podcasts think? We have control of the mainstream. We need to control the podcasters. They understand that. And this is an attempt to try to solve that problem or solve that challenge, which is why things would continue. So right now, as things stand, is the national dialogue necessary? Many people would say no, because there is a plethora of research, data, conversation which has already happened, which can assist any decision maker, policy maker to take the interventions and the steps that they need to. Is it legitimate? Many people would say no, because the public does not feel like they're included. It looks led from the presidency, looks like it's even factional within the structures of the ANC in and of themselves. In and of themselves. You thought I wasn't going to say it. I said it. I get a lot of flack, and we joke about how I say in and of itself so much. So I did say it again. It's part of what our culture is here. We have to say in and of itself once an episode. So, but you can't play a drinking game because I only said it once. One shot is not going to make a difference. So there's no drinking game there. So as things stand, there is no legitimacy for this. And then the question is it going to be effective? Is it going to be effective? Maybe if they do a referendum as an attachment to the dialogue process. But as it stands right now, talking for the sake of talking makes no major difference to everybody's life. And the reality is, there's one dialogue that everybody cares about. That's the national dialogue, which was started by General Mkhwanazi. Mahala, free 99. That's the national dialogue that everybody is focused on. All these other national dialogues are not that significant. We want to know who is Brown Mukhotsi. We want to know who was talking to whom in terms of Katiso Molefe, in terms of Vusimuzi Matlala. We want to know who are the grand Hoshkari daddies of this syndicate world. We want to know what are the connections between the DJs, the nightclubs, the Ralph Stanfields, the gangs, all of those things, the politicians and the police. That remains the national dialogue that matters. Let's meet in the comment section. Tell me, what do you think about Kgalema Motlanthe saying Andizi to President Ramaphosa and adding more salt to the wound? It's a movie, a drama, a series. Let's meet in the comment section.